Hey guys, I'm Urizi. This story is all about what if Naruto turns into a fox during a full moon. Pre-timescope, no Biju, Konoha is a village of ninjas who hunt demons. Naruto has secrets and Sasuke wants to please his father. And there's Orochimaru, plotting kitsune, unfortunate werewolves, assorted demons, mysterious elders. And tonight is the night of a full moon. Before we proceed with the story, please like and subscribe to this channel if you liked the video, and don't forget to check the description for the other works of the author if you liked the story. Let's start. Prequel. The Fox Moon. As Naruto dressed for the day after his quick shower, he checked his calendar and grimaced at what he found. Why does it have to be tonight? A cloud immediately formed over him and he hadn't even left his apartment yet. He dragged his feet through brushing his teeth, gathering his gear, and making and eating his breakfast. And then he went for the rancid milk. It was a little, single-serve milk carton he'd bought from a cafeteria-style restaurant weeks ago. He'd tucked it away in the back of the refrigerator, and purposely let it age well past its sell-by date in preparation for today. As he cracked it open, it was hard not to gag from its sour smell, but he steeled his nerves and brought it to his lips. What's this? Before Naruto could manage a protest, Iruka had snatched his bad milk and was checked the date on it. Naruto? Iruka sputtered. This is almost 3 weeks past its expiration date. Is it? The boy asked cluelessly, and then flashed his signature stupid grin. Heh, I didn't notice. Pay more attention next time. The man scolded as he poured the spoiled liquid down the sink drain. This could have made you very sick. Now get going before you're late. Okay. Still grinning like a fool, Naruto grabbed his bag and scampered out of the apartment. He raced down several flights of stairs and out into the street. But then he ducked down a narrow alley for some privacy and swore up a storm. I need to drink the milk faster next time. Uchiha Sasuke sighed as he tried to look like he was paying rapt attention to a lecture on Konoha Gakuer no Sado's history. So far the teacher hadn't said anything that he hadn't already learned from his family or read in a book. If he was a clanless moron like Naruto, he might have goofed off, or if he was a lazy bum like Shikamaru, he might have slept through the lesson, but he was an Uchiha and he had his clan's sterling reputation to uphold. In ancient times, the village hidden in the leaves had been founded as a military village that primarily hosted ninjas, shadowy assassins that waged war and made the land of fire a safer country. But over time the wars between different countries died down and the ninjas reinvented themselves. They expanded and improved their use of magical techniques and went from being hunters and killers of men, to being hunters and killers of demons. The Uchiha clan had been instrumental in the original founding of the village and its transition from ninja center to demon hunting center. His clan continued to be essential because of their high degree of skill and their powerful Kekai Genkai. With their Sharingan eyes, they could predict any move, steal techniques from rival hunters and even demons, and see through illusions. Without the power of the Uchiha, Konoha would surely have fallen apart years ago. His father had taught him to be proud of his heritage and made sure that Sasuke had memorized every important event in the clan's history. He knew every crisis dating back to the ancient wars where men were pitted against other men instead of demons. So sitting through this history lecture was a waste of his time. But then again, there were idiots like Naruto who actually needed this lesson. Not all demon hunters came from elite clans, some were born of more humble roots but had been blessed with the uncommon power of magic. All children born in and around Konoha were tested for chakra potential, and if they had any they were offered a chance to train in the academy to be a hunter ninja. Sasuke briefly turned his dark eyes away from the instructor to scan the small crowd of his peers. He only knew about half of them. The rest were either from families too small and obscure for him to recognize on sight, or were children of special talent born of talentless families. The other half of his class, the half that he knew, were representatives of the great clans of Konoha, and his 2 squad mates. Haruno Sakura did come from a family with magical talent, but the Haruno's chakra capacities were low and they generally focused on being healers, teachers, and working the administrative side of the hunter business. Sakura was the first of her family in generations to pursue field training with the intent of actually hunting down and killing demons. She was smart, having graduated, not that having graduated excused any of them from furthering their education. They still had to attend lectures 2 to 3 times a week, the top kunoichi in their class, and had excellent chakra control. But she had little stamina and was horribly infatuated with him, which made her very annoying. His other squad mate, Naruto, was from no magical family that anyone knew of. He was a foster kid that had bounced from home to home for so long that he didn't remember where he was from, and no one wanted to try and go through the lengthy paper trail to try and trace his origins. When he'd arrived in Konoha Gakure no Sato at age 10 and been placed with Toji Mizuki, he'd tested positive for strong chakra potential and been put in catch-up classes so that he could be put on a squad with kids his own age. It was a mystery how he'd graduated on time with the rest of them. Sasuke had heard a rumor that it was a reward for discovering that Mizuki was a traitor allied with a dangerous rogue hunter, but he didn't find it credible, as his grades were bad and his skills in the three major areas taijutsu, ninjutsu, and especially genjutsu weren't much better. As his gaze landed on Naruto, Sasuke frowned at what he found. Normally Naruto would goof off during their lengthy advanced lectures. He'd sleep, he'd snack, he'd whisper to whoever he was sitting by, or he'd scrawl ridiculous plots in his notebook instead of lecture notes. But today he was doodling aimlessly with a pensive, almost worried look on his bizarre whiskered face. Perhaps he isn't feeling well, the Uchiha mused. The blonde foster kid seemed to get sick at least once a month. But he always recovered very quickly, missing only 1 or 2 days at a time, so it was never a problem. So long as Sasuke never caught whatever Naruto had, he was willing to overlook this particular flaw in his teammate. And that brings us to the present day, their instructor, Umino Iruka, said. Sasuke internally cringed and put his full focus back to the front of the classroom, silently hoping that no one had noticed his inattention. Now, Ebisu will give you your demon lecture for today, Iruka-sensei said, bowed, and left them for a few minutes to fetch Ebisu. There were hundreds of different kinds of demons in the world, and it was important to know their dangers and weaknesses in order to be the best hunter ninja possible. Before graduation they'd studied the major demon families, and type, and class distinction. Now that they were graduated into junior or rookie, genin, level hunters, they studied specific species, exceptions to rules, and even individual demons that had been dangerous and difficult to kill throughout history. Before Sasuke's peers could get to whispering nosily amongst themselves, the classroom door slid open to admit Ebisu. The special Jonin wore his hitayate mounted on a square cloth that covered his hair, and with his round shades he looked like a cool guy. But his rigid, uptight personality immediately ruined that perception the instant that he opened his mouth. Good morning, students, Ebisu greeted briskly. Today I shall be educating you on the details and subtleties of an exotic curse-born creature that has well established itself in our lands. The man paused to scrawl a word on the chalkboard behind him. Today I shall lecture you on the dangerous, bloodthirsty, and contagious werewolf. Sasuke leaned forward in his seat, intent on absorbing every word. His father would expect nothing less of him. And Sasuke would meet and hopefully exceed his father's expectations, so that maybe tonight he'd steal a little praise away from Itachi at the dinner table. Sakura ran through her stretches for the 3rd time while Sasuke and Naruto competed in kunai throwing. All of their peers had already left the academy building with their mentors, either elite Chunin or Jonin, to do their afternoon training. Their mentor, Hatake Kakashi, was late, again. I bet Kakashi-sensei will be late to his own funeral, the girl thought sourly as she bent down to touch her toes once more. How does he expect us to become proficient hunters if he never gets around to teaching us anything? I bet when the year's over he'll dump us off on someone else and then forget all about us. Their sensei was an aloof and tardy creature. The silver-haired hunter always had his masked face buried in a smutty romance novel, even when he'd subjected them to his entrance exam, the Bell test. While he did give them good advice when he was around, he seemed only half interested in them and their progress. Even though he had stressed teamwork to them, he didn't seem keen on being part of a team. Where's your head today? Sasuke asked, drawing Sakura's eyes over to her male teammates. You're sucking more than usual. Shut up. Naruto snapped testily. I'm just having an off day. That's every day for you, Sasuke replied. Today is worse. Jerk. Naruto fumed. Idiot, Sasuke retorted. Bastard. Dead last. Would you two stop fighting? Sakura asked, trying not to growl. Couldn't you try to do something more productive while we wait for sensei, Like target practice. Sure, Sasuke said with a shrug and strolled over to the targets to retrieve his set of kunai. I'll practice more, and the idiot will just throw his blades in a random direction. Sasuke. Naruto snarled, stomping his foot, clenching his fists, and glaring furiously at his rival. Why do boys have to be so stupid sometimes? So what did you guys think of the lesson on werewolves today? Sakura asked, hoping to distract the boys from arguing. Informative, Sasuke said. I wouldn't ever want to suffer the misfortune of becoming one, that's for sure. If the dude who created the curse wasn't already dead in dust, he should have been thrown in a pit of venomous snake demons for dreaming it up, Naruto answered. Sakura was taken a bit aback by Naruto's response. The thick-headed blonde rarely spoke with such a dark tone of voice, and she couldn't recall him ever advocating a torturous death so seriously before. It went against his usual image of a carefree class clown who always had to be loud and noticeable. That's a bit harsh, Sakura remarked after a moment. It's probably not mean enough, Naruto replied as he studied his stock of shuriken for nicks and blunt edges. The guy invented a magical disease that turns people into wolf monsters that live to kill people or make them into other werewolves. It's awful. Did you know someone who turned into a werewolf? Sasuke wondered. No, Naruto answered quickly and put his shuriken away. No, I don't know anyone. And then he stomped off to retrieve his kunai from, only half of which had actually landed on any of the practice targets. What about the first lecture? He yelled over his shoulder. I totally missed what it was about. Naruto. Sakura groaned. It was an overview of Konoha Gakuer no Sado's transition from a ninja village to a ninja demon hunter village in notable historical points from then to present day. Sounds boring, Naruto commented as he walked back. The pink-haired girl struggled to rein in her temper. Naruto always seemed to push her buttons, acting stupid, trying to persuade her to go on a date with him, insulting Sasuke. They were supposed to be a team, but Naruto was so annoying and Sasuke thought that she was annoying, and the two boys were always competing, so they could never quite pull it together except in brief moments of great stress that forced them to. History may seem boring, but it's important to know it, Sakura insisted. You can learn all sorts of things from past events. The girl hesitated, and then turned to her other male teammate. I was really impressed at hearing how many times the Uchiha Clan came up, Sasuke-kun. I mean, I know your clan has always been very important to Konoha, but to have it all laid out like that on Iruka-sensei's timeline was, really awesome. Sasuke's face turned stony and annoyed. The Harano girl's shoulders slumped in dismay. Sasuke was the top rookie in their class, talented, and very handsome. Of all the girls in their class, she was the one placed on Sasuke's squad. All she wanted was his approval and a chance. But no matter what she did, what she said, how hard she worked, he treated her just like all the other fangirls. So the history lesson was all about the Uchiha? Naruto asked as he fiddled boredly with a kunai. Good thing I wasn't paying attention. I would have fallen asleep. Sasuke shot Naruto an icy glare. Idiot. Poof. Sorry I'm late. Kakashi apologized as he appeared in a puff of white smoke. I came across an old lady who needed help crossing the street, and then I ended up escorting her to her home and doing some handy work for her. Liar. Sakura and Naruto snapped in near unison while Sasuke rolled his eyes. Fine, don't believe me, their silver-haired sensei said with a smile, or what appeared to be a smile. It was always so hard to tell when they could only see one of his eyes. Let's get started. Hatake Kakashi stared at the pages of his favorite book without really seeing the words printed on it. He'd practically memorized the story, so he really didn't need to read it, but the exercise was familiar and comforting. And his book was part of his image, so he would never get rid of it. Sasuke and Sakura were sparring, or at least trying to. The pink-haired girl had trouble seriously fighting the boy that she was so clearly infatuated with. She never had trouble fighting with Naruto, but when pitted against the young Uchiha she turned meek and ineffectual. Perhaps if I ensnare her in a genjutsu that swaps Sasuke's voice and appearance with Naruto's, she'll make some progress, Kakashi mused as his uncovered eye trailed over the graphic descriptions of the story's main character getting intimately involved with a pretty girl. Yes, that could work. But should I warn Sasuke and get him on board with the plan, or just do it and see how long it takes for them to figure out what's going on? Whatever he decided, it would have to wait until their next session training together. It was getting late and in the next 20 minutes or so he would be dismissing them for the day. Then he would be free of them until tomorrow afternoon, when he would be late picking them up. Glancing away from the pages of his book, he briefly watched the boy and girl stumble through a feeble mock fight. Sakura didn't want to hit or hurt the boy that she so admired, and since she didn't put up much of a fight, Sasuke couldn't really do much to her. Naruto sat off to the side, resting after having sparred with Sasuke and then Sakura earlier. Taking students was not his idea. Had the master hunter Sarutobi-sama the Hokage not twisted his arm and nearly blackmailed him, he would have never taken them on. And of course the time he finally gave in, so as to save his precious books, he ended up with a pack of kids that twisted at every scabbed wound on his soul. Sasuke was an Uchiha, and so reminded him of Obito and a little bit of himself. Sakura made him think of Rin. And Naruto reminded him of a lot of things. The boy with the strange whisker-like markings was loud and boisterous and silly and made him wonder if Obito had been reborn as a blonde. His bright yellow hair and sky-blue eyes brought to mind someone else. And that made him wonder. A red-haired woman, her form just beginning to be altered by pregnancy, settled herself in his sensei's lap while their squad took a rest break from their training, and his sensei immediately became distracted by her, completely forgetting about the 3 young students that were sitting not 3 feet away and watching the scene with varying reactions to it. Seeing the way that Naruto was staring up at the ghostly smudge of the full moon barely visible in the still blue sky made him wonder, too. This boy, Kakashi narrowed his eye, still staring at the blonde boy who was staring up at the ghostly hint of the moon with something akin to dread. Could he be? Sasuke took Sakura down yet again, and the girl stumbled and tripped into Naruto on the sidelines. The boy with the whiskers looked very startled. He hadn't seen her coming at all, but he recovered quickly and flashed the embarrassed girl a cheesy grin. His mood and expression shift was so quick that it was like he'd slipped on a mask. "Hey, Sakura-chan." Naruto grinned broadly. "Wanna get some ramen from Ichiraku's with me after training?" "No." Sakura snapped and hurriedly scrambled off her teammate. "Ah, man," Naruto whined and pouted. "It's the best ramen in the whole world." "I'd know, I've been all over the place." Kakashi was aware of the boy's history, as much as anyone knew of it, anyway, and knew that that was no idle boast. Naruto had bounced from foster home to foster home, with the occasional layover in various orphanages, and been all over the land of fire. Such an unstable childhood had probably contributed to his loud, attention-seeking behaviors. Not knowing how long he'll be there or where he'll go next, he probably wanted to make an impression so that someone would remember him before he disappeared, Kakashi mused. "Naruto, I said no," Sakura growled testily and moved even further away from the boy. "Why not?" Naruto pouted and stood up to brush invisible dirt off his garish orange jacket and pants. "If you don't have any money, I could pay for your soup." The girl was tense with annoyance. "Naruto." "What?" the boy asked stupidly. "You'll go out with me?" Sasuke groaned and muttered, "Idiot. Naruto." Seeing Sakura's annoyance swiftly shifting into fury, Kakashi reluctantly lowered his book to block the bloodbath. "All right, that's enough for today," the masked man cheerfully announced. "Run along home now. If you do well enough during Friday's mission, I may be able to find a suitable C rank to try." It was the same promise he made every week. Friday he would sign them up for a D rank mission, which could be anything from weeding old ladies' gardens to babysitting unruly children, essentially community service. C rank missions were more advanced, more interesting, and were actually dangerous, and the promise of one was the perfect incentive to keep them on task during the D rank. Of course, in order to keep it a valid incentive, he'd have to give in some time and get a C rank for them to do. He just hoped that it wouldn't be soon. The idea of taking his 3 trainees out of the village for 3 days or more and trying to defend some merchant or other traveler against bandits and / or lesser demons was not an appealing one. The 3 children said their farewells, gathered their gear, and departed. Sasuke headed to the high-walled Uchiha district while Sakura headed to the apartment complex where her family resided. Naruto paused to warily eye the daytime moon before rushing off to Umino Iruka, his current guardian, as if the celestial object was chasing him. Kakashi stood on the training grounds and stared after the blonde child long after he was out of sight. And he wondered. Naruto grimly hiked through the forests surrounding Konoha no Sato as the setting sun rapidly faded into full night. He had a long way to go and he was behind schedule. If only he'd been able to get that bad milk down. I almost miss Mizuki, the boy thought with a scowl as he jogged through the underbrush. He didn't care what I did or where I was. I didn't have to bother faking sick, I could just leave and he wouldn't notice. But there was no point in crying over the rancid milk he hadn't drank. He had a place he needed to be before he saw the full moon. So he kept his head down and hurried. He hopped over fallen logs, pushed through dense bushes, and even took to the tree branches for short stretches, making incredible leaps by channeling chakra through his legs and feet the way he'd been taught to. For nearly 5 miles beyond the village's outer walls he ran until he came to a particular clearing. And there he made his final preparations. It was embarrassing and cold, but he stripped off his clothes, keeping only his hitayate. He loved the thing and sometimes even slept with it on because he was so proud of it, although he moved it from his forehead to down around his neck. He folded his clothing and shoved it into a backpack he'd brought with him. And then he shoved the bag into a hollowed-out tree, looked up at the sky, and waited. Within moments the white circle of the moon had taken hold of the magical chakra in his body and turned it against him. The change didn't hurt, it never had, but it felt uncomfortable and undeniably freaky. Fur sprouted from his skin, his teeth grew pointed, his fingernails became claws, his ears lengthened, his joints shifted, his skull reshaped, which was the weirdest, freakiest part, and a bushy tail grew from the base of his spine. In about 5 minutes, it was all done. Naruto sat back and stared at his hands, now hand-like paws covered in black fur. The black fur extended down from his fingers to his elbows, and from his toes to just past his ankles. His ears, now triangular and canine-like, were black too, and there were black stripes on his furry cheeks like the weird whiskers marks he normally had. The rest of his fur was yellow, with white on his belly, chest, throat, chin, and on the tip of his bushy brush tail. Until the moon set and the sun rose, he would be stuck like this. He could have avoided the transformation if he'd stayed in his room and kept his blinds drawn so that he couldn't see the moon, but he wouldn't have been able to sleep, his skin would have itched, and the desire to open the window and look would have tormented him all night. It was easier to go someplace safe and give in to the moon's power. It had gotten him in trouble in his previous foster homes. They called him a runaway and troublemaker when he would slip out at night. And sometimes, when he was upset, some of the changes would happen in the daytime without him meaning them to, and his foster parents would become afraid of him and get rid of him, fearing that he was some kind of freakish half-demon. It was why he'd been disowned and thrown into the foster care system in the first place. I don't know why he's crying, he just picked up the good silverware and started screaming for no reason. He'd barely been 5 when it had happened, but snatches of his childhood and certain facts were seared into his mind. Why can't he speak when he's transformed? All he does is bark like an animal. His mother had loved him, but the rest of his relatives were disgusted by him. How dare you call your own nephew an abomination? His very existence caused pain and dishonor. Mommy, you're bleeding. His 5th birthday party was a subdued and unhappy going-away party. You're being too soft, Dad. We should kill him and end the problem. What if he bites someone? What if he's contagious? His grandfather had taken him on a long trip to some kind of office, signed some papers, and then left him for his first foster family to collect, and that had been that. If you reveal any family secrets we will know, we will find you, and we will kill you. If you let anyone see what you are, they will kill you. Never breathe the name Uzumaki again. You are not one of us. You never were. An animal whine slipped out of his throat and Naruto slunk off, on all fours now. It was more comfortable, even deeper into the forest. He wouldn't be able to sleep, he felt too energized. So he trotted another half-mile to find something to occupy his time. When he'd first come to Konoha, he'd nearly gotten caught several times on full moon nights. Living in a village that hosted demon hunter ninja was very different from living in a village full of only civilians, and he'd had to learn fast and adjust quickly to survive. And early on, he'd been fortunate enough to find the best place and the best company for him to be furry. Naruto slid down into a small ravine, a pit in the woods with steep sides with the exception of one shallow trail leading in and out of it. In the steepest side there was a small cave formed by enormous boulders and ancient tree roots. When he arrived, the cave was already lit by a dim battery-powered lantern. I might need to bring more batteries next time, Naruto thought as he waited at the cave's entrance. Or maybe it needs a new bulb. It's not as bright as last time. A monster appeared to greet him. It was more than double his size with shaggy yellow-tan fur and blue eyes. The creature was unnerving not because it looked dangerous and aggressive, but because it looked so sickly. It was thin with chunks of its fur missing so that it looked like it had mange, and its eyes were severely clouded with dark stains around them, and it stank. It shuffled up to him with the stiff gait of an old man with severe arthritis and sniffed at him. After a moment, the nearly blind werewolf was sure of his guest's identity and it stiffly retreated back into its cave. Naruto followed it in. He had nothing to be afraid of. The worst it could do to him was kill him, but it was so sickly he was certain that he could get away if it ever turned on him. He'd discovered the werewolf completely on accident only 3 months after arriving in Konoha. It had been healthier then with less fur missing and better eyesight, and it had attacked him. But Naruto had been so scared, having never run across a werewolf before, that he'd just surrendered and made crying noises, and that had stopped it. The werewolf had been puzzled by him, but it hadn't tried to harm him since that first night. And now, 2 years later, it was almost like they were friends. Naruto really should have reported the werewolf to someone. It was a monster, a curse-born demon that was dangerous. But if he reported it, he'd have to explain how he'd found it and why it hadn't killed him, and he wasn't confident that he could lie well enough to not get in trouble. And if he reported the werewolf, it would be hunted down and killed, and then he would have no company on the full moon. He followed the werewolf Oakamijiji, old man wolf, to the back of the cave where a beat-up checkerboard sat balanced on a flat-topped boulder and lit by the lantern. Naruto wasn't sure where Oakamijiji had found it, probably in a garbage can somewhere. Some of the checkers were missing, they'd been replaced by some small black rocks and discarded red bottle caps. And so, by lantern light, and in Oakamijiji's case, aided by a large magnifying glass, they played checkers, all night long. It's what they did every night of the full moon. Naruto imagined that they would continue to do it until Oakamijiji died, which seemed like it would be sooner every month. Tonight, as they played, Naruto thought about all the things that Ebisu had said in his lecture on werewolves. He doesn't seem to be a mindless, bloodthirsty beast that's forgotten all about being human. That fight the first time I met him, it was because he didn't know me and I scared him. Oakamijiji is really smart, I mean, he plays checkers. I didn't teach him how to do that. And no one's ever complained about pets getting eaten or chickens and cows disappearing or people getting attacked, so he isn't bothering anyone. Maybe, it's because he's so old, he's gotten over being a crazy werewolf? It made sense and seemed very possible. Or it could be that a lot of what Ebisu and everybody else knew about werewolves was wrong. That was much less likely, but Naruto would be very glad if that was the case. Mom wouldn't be so crazy for what she did, then, he thought as he made another move on the worn checkerboard. I would have a lot less to worry about. It would all be great, but... Naruto tried not to whine as Oakamijiji took 3 of his pieces in one move. If I ever find my father, I'll kill him, because everything is his fault. Everything. The werewolf wheezed as he squinted through his cracked magnifying glass and tried to discern the checkers on the board. It got harder every month, but so long as he could still see he intended to play. Checkers on the full moon with the strange little fox demon was the last human thing he was still capable of, and the highlight of his month. He'd been suspicious and wary of the little fox demon when he'd first encountered it years ago. But it was so small and pathetic and frightened that he'd held off on killing it in favor of the wait-and-see approach. And, over the months, as it came back to spend time with him on the nights of the full moon when the curse vibrated in his veins and kept him from sleeping, he found another, very selfish, reason to not kill it. He was lonely, so very, very lonely. After that night, years and years ago, when he'd first transformed from the light of the full moon, in front of witnesses, so he couldn't pretend that it hadn't happened when morning came, he'd been alone. He was exiled from his old life irrevocably then, and he didn't fit in with other werewolves, the sane ones either. When the little fox demon had come into his miserable existence, he'd clung to it like a dying man clings to his last comforts. And he was a dying man. Every move he made, he could feel the silver shrapnel in his back shift. It wasn't enough to kill him outright, but the slivers of metal were too deep to dig out and so had slowly poisoned him over the years. It made him queasy and weak and interrupted his powerful regenerate talents, and trapped him as a wolf, regardless of the moon, sun, and his own will. It made his fur fall out, leaving him with ugly bald patches. And it was slowly stealing his sight away. He was in no shape to hunt anymore. He would never, ever resort to preying upon house pets or livestock, or stealing, and without his snares, traps, and fish hooks he would have starved to death long ago. Some days, most days, now he wondered why he didn't just give up, lay down, and die. He wondered why he clung to life, instead of finding a way to end it all and escape from the pain, because there was no way he'd get the poisonous silver out of his body. There really wasn't anything he had left to live for. He'd lost everything he'd ever wanted and valued that night a little over 12 years ago when he'd seen the full moon after years of hiding from it because of the mauling he shouldn't have survived. I want to do one last good thing, he thought as he took a turn on the checkerboard. Before I die, I want to do one last good thing. If I could have one wish, it would be to meet my son, but that's probably asking too much, so it will be one last good deed for me. Although, in his deteriorating health, that one good deed seemed like it would be a stretch, too. He wouldn't give up though. He couldn't give up. If he did, who would play checkers with the little yellow fox? Sequel, The Will of the Foxfire. Chapter 1, Prologue. Haku hated killing. Had his circumstances not been so unfortunate, he might have led a nearly ordinary civilian life. But he had been born with the power to create ice, a Kekai Genkai an unforgivable sin in Kiri, and so in order to survive he had little choice to become a killer. The effeminate boy sat in the pocket dimension behind the panes of his demonic ice mirrors and unhappily studied his next victims in between volleys Senbon needles, both those made of metal and those he generated from his own ice. Two boys, young hunters of the leaf, sat trapped in his dome of ice. Their squad had the misfortune to get between Zabuza-sama and his latest contract, Tajuna the bridge builder. His master, Mamakai Zabuza of the infamous Seven Swordsmen, had once been a feared and respected slayer of demons of Kirigakure no Sato. But Zabuza-sama had tried to depose the Mizukage, and failed. That left Zabuza-sama a fugitive on the run from everyone, and that worked as a mercenary to try and gain the funds needed for a second coup attempt. Mamakai Zabuza was a monster, a lover of murder and blood, but Haku would follow him to hell and back. Zabuza-sama had saved him from the streets when no one else would and taught him the secrets of ninja magic. The swordsman owned his life and Haku was his grateful tool. Whatever Zabuza-sama wanted, Haku would do, no matter how terrible. Now two boys not much younger than Haku would have to die. Or did they? If he could use his precise needle skill to place them in a state of false death, they would be taken out of the fight. Then he could do the same for their female comrade, who was charged with defending the bridge builder. And then he could slay the old drunkard while Zabuza-sama kept the dangerous copycat Hatake Kakashi busy, and the contract would be fulfilled. They would be paid, and they could leave in search of the next ugly job. It was the perfect solution, he thought, as he riddled the Uchiha boy's body with needles in dozens of important pressure points. The dark-haired boy was of the Uchiha Clan, and killing him would draw the wrath of the Sharingan upon them. And Haku had a fondness for the blonde boy after having met him off the battlefield. He had the sense that Naruto was a lot like him, one who hid a secret shame. Although, as Konoha treasured those with Kekai Genkai unlike Kiri, it was impossible for Haku to guess what Naruto's secret was. Haku's needles hit their marks and he watched impassively in the shelter of his ice mirrors as the Uchiha crumpled and appeared to die. He tried to warn Naruto away from continuing the fight. Even though he wouldn't kill the boy, the needles would still hurt him and it would take a while for him to fully recover. Something about Naruto abruptly changed. The clumsy boy who was frightened but determined to do anything to help was replaced with a boy who had a feral air about him. His stance changed, wisps of chakra seemed to ooze from his skin, the odd whisker-like marks on his face darkened and spread into black stripes, his fingernails and toenails seemed to have turned into claws, his lips peeled back in a snarl and revealed canine teeth so long they were fangs, and then he opened his eyes and glared at Haku with cat-like pupils and blue irises that were bleeding into red. With an animalistic roar, Naruto charged, his clawed hands shrouded in blue flames. What? Haku was forced to dodge to another mirror as the boy slammed his fist into the one that Haku had previously hidden in, and cracked it. The ice user tried to cripple Naruto with more senbon needles, but the feral child was much faster and much more agile than before. The blonde moved like a demon trapped in a human's skin. This boy. Then Naruto shattered one of his mirrors, something that his Uchiha comrade hadn't even come close to doing. And then he did it again, and again, and again. With his mirrors a failure and with his chakra stores steadily draining, Haku released his hold on them as he dove back into the real world in a bodily attack on Naruto's back. His feral foe whirled around and caught Haku by the wrists, squeezing them and digging his claws through the fabric of Haku's kimono-like sleeves while the blue fire seared his skin. Lashing out with his foot, Haku was able to free one of his hands long enough to form the one-handed hand seals that generated ice needles. The ice weapons turned the wild boy into a pincushion, which allowed Haku to break loose and get a little distance. Who is he? The ice needles didn't buy him the time that he thought they would. Naruto shook them off in a shower of half-melted ice shards and then was on Haku again. The demonic boy darted in again and again, slamming Haku with punches and slashing at him with his claws. What is he? And then with one final punch he shattered Haku's porcelain mask. Is this his secret shame? Naruto's demonic red eyes went from furious, to confused, and betrayed. Haku. Chapter 2, Moon Jitters. Naruto sat by the fireplace and fidgeted. They were still in the land of waves. Kakashi-sensei predicted that it would be at least a week until Sasuke had healed enough from being turned into a human pincushion for them to hit the road back to Konoha. That was too long. The blonde boy stubbornly kept his back to the window. It didn't matter that the night sky was overcast with a thick blanket of clouds, the moon was still full. His body knew it, and every nerve vibrated like he was high on caffeine. If the clouds parted and he looked, he was beyond screwed. If you let anyone see what you are, they will kill you. Naruto shivered at the distant memory of his grandfather's cold words. Grandfather was right, too, especially now. He was stuck in a civilian's house with demon-hunting ninja. If he changed, he'd be killed. This sucks so bad. This mission wasn't supposed to have lasted so long. But Tajuna had lied and Naruto had been stupid enough to push for them to go forward anyway. And then Zabuza and Haku had gotten involved, Kakashi-sensei had been hurt, they'd done tree climbing training, there had been another fight that had resulted in the mission being a success, and Haku and Zabuza dying along with Gato, the evil businessman, but Sasuke was hurt so they were stuck. And Naruto was screwed. One unlucky glance and everything would be undone. Even if he was able to get away with his life, he'd never be able to go back to Konoha, the first stable home he'd had in forever. He'd lose his best opportunity to get stronger. It had been a secret dream of his to grow powerful enough to find his mother and rescue her from her family so that they could be together again. The first night in his first foster home he'd wept into his new pillow, which hadn't been his for long, and swore that he'd find a way to make this dream come true. His unfriendly relatives were immensely powerful in his child mind, and for a while this dream of his seemed impossible to reach. But Konohagakure no Sato and its academy had given him real hope. His dream became a plan. He would get stronger, having Uchiha Sasuke as a rival would help greatly towards this goal, then he would find his mother, somehow, he would bust her out, somehow, and then bring her to Konoha to live with him. She'd lived away from her family before, it was how she'd met his father, so it shouldn't be a problem for her to do it again. She knew how to hide in plain sight, she'd shown him the necklace that allowed her to do it. Can I get you anything else, dear? Naruto flinched slightly and glanced out of the corner of his eye to see Tsunami, the bridge builder's daughter, fussing over Sasuke again. The Uchiha boy was laid out in a traditional futon bed on the floor of the room with squares of gauze taped over the numerous puncture wounds left by Haku's battle needles. Sasuke was clearly irritated by the woman's, and Sakura's, hovering, but he did his best to remain polite and uphold the respectable, squeaky clean reputation of his clan. No thank you, Tsunami-san. I think I'll go to sleep now. All right, the dark-haired woman said with a kind smile. If you need anything at all, don't hesitate to speak up. Tsunami left and Sakura, who had been in the kitchen washing the dishes, took her place. I'm sorry that I wasn't much help, the pink-haired girl apologized quietly, wringing her hands. I'll do better next time, Sasuke-kun, I swear. I'm going to sleep now, Sasuke grunted and stiffly rolled over. Sakura sighed and went about setting up the futons for the rest of Team 7. Naruto frowned, but remained by the fireplace and fidgeted. Sakura was nice, to other people, especially her Sasuke-kun, very smart, and pretty. She was also something of an outsider in the ninja hunter community as her family never worked in the field and instead stuck to working in the tower or the hospital, so she and Naruto sort of had something in common. If he could persuade Sakura to be his girlfriend, he would be further entrenched in Konoha, he would belong more. Even though he'd stayed in Konoha for just over 2 years, the fear that he'd be uprooted again still lingered, and he was always looking for things and people that would tie him down to one place so he wouldn't move anymore. I don't see why Sasuke is always such a jerk to her, Naruto grumped as he struggled to ignore the crawling sensation that had spread under his skin. He could have been stuck with worse fangirls, like Ino, or what's her face. Sakura-chan isn't all touchy-feely like them, she just wants to make him happy. But Sasuke was an Uchiha. That meant that he only enjoyed hanging out with other Uchiha, and he would probably marry a distant cousin that was chosen for him. The Uchiha clan was a pack of powerful snobs worse than even the Hyuga. Naruto had heard Ino's dad complain once that only truly respected each other. They felt that they were the elite of the village and expected to be treated as such. Naruto thought they were a bunch of cheap cheaters. With their eyes able to copy jutsu, they didn't have to work half as hard as non-Uchiha did to advance themselves. The Sharingan made them lazy, and that laziness didn't hurt them because their eyes were so powerful. Do I have to go to bed, Mom? Inari, Tajuna's grandson, asked with a whine. I'm not, he yawned widely, tired at all. It's late, Inari, Tsunami scolded. And our guests need their rest. Now come along up to bed. But I wanted to look at the moon. Inari complained, but Naruto could still hear his small feet going up the stairs. I love looking at the full moon. Well, I hate it. Naruto thought sourly as he fought down a shudder and stared into the fire. Why can't the stupid moon skip being full? Good night, everyone, Tsunami said to them. I will see you in the morning. And then she joined her young son upstairs. Tajuna was already up there, probably sleeping after a hard day repairing the damage to his bridge and completing its construction. That left Team 7 in the ground floor by themselves. Are you sure we shouldn't set up a watch schedule, Sensei? Sakura asked. I've set up wards all around the property, Kakashi assured her. If anything tries to intrude, I'll know. There's no need for you to stay up all night on guard. All right. Sakura started to get into her bed, but hesitated. Naruto, what are you doing over there? Naruto flinched, as if he hadn't been listening to anything going on around him. Oh, I was just thinking about how everyone's gonna be so jealous of us when we get back. He replied with a broad grin and his hands laced together behind his head. Naruto, the girl groaned. Is that all you care about? He kept up his cheesy grin and shrugged at her. The girl scoffed at him and settled under her sheets. Go to bed, Naruto. Okay. Naruto agreed, hopped up from his seat by the fire, and strolled over to the third futon as he peeled his orange jacket off, all while keeping his gaze stubbornly away from the nearby window. Good night, Sakura-chan. Good night, Kakashi-sensei. Good night, bastard. Naruto. Sakura hissed angrily. Good night, Kakashi replied. Sasuke grunted. And then the room became quiet, save for the crackling of the fire and the occasional turn of the page in their sensei's beloved book. Naruto tried to lay as still as possible underneath his sheets. He wasn't going to sleep, not with the full moon lurking behind the clouds. But he had to fake it, because there was no real reason why a young ninja like him couldn't get to sleep. As he tried to fake sleeping, he traced his fingers along the white swirl stitched to the shoulder of his jacket. He'd made it himself out of leather, rope, glue, and wood in a craft class he'd taken while living in one of the nicer homes. It was based off the symbol he'd always seen all over everything when he'd lived with his mother. The symbol of the family that had disowned him. It was cheap, handmade thing that probably wasn't all that accurate, so hopefully he wouldn't get in trouble. Hopefully. He laid there for what felt like hours, but was only minutes. His skin itched and his nerves twitched. He wanted to get up and run out of the house, strip off his clothes, and trigger the change himself if the moon still wasn't visible. It was always much easier to bear the force of the full moon as an animal than if he tried to stay human. But tonight he couldn't give in. He didn't dare. To distract himself, he thought about Haku. The odd, effeminate boy from Kiri was strange, had been strange. His devotion to Zabuza had been as sick as it had been undeniable, and Naruto could sort of understand it. Naruto was said that he was dead. That blue fire. Naruto stared at his hand illuminated by the red glow of the fire. I did it again. The first time had been against Mizuki, when his academy instructor and guardian at the time had manipulated him into stealing a special scroll. He'd learned a technique from it as the traitor had instructed him to, but had been drained by it. And then Mizuki had tried to kill him, and Iruka. Naruto had tried to use the new technique, the Kagebunshin no Jutsu, but the clone he'd managed to generate hadn't lasted long. With Iruka hurt, and Naruto separated from him, he'd managed a partial transformation against Mizuki and cast a few brief flares of blue flame. The silver-haired traitor had been so startled by Naruto's power that the boy had been able to knock him out before fainting in exhaustion himself. What sort of freak are you? Even though he'd never cared much for Mizuki, it still stung to hear the words and see the fearful disgust on his face. And for weeks after the incident, there'd been the fear. What if Mizuki told the Umbu about what he'd seen, and the Umbu came for him to find out what he was? But it hadn't happened, so if he'd told them they hadn't believed him. Maybe. Naruto pressed his face into his pillow and shivered. I wish it was morning already. Kakashi waited about an hour before closing his book. By that time both Sakura and Sasuke were asleep and the fire in the fireplace was nearly burned out. But Naruto was still awake, although he was certainly trying to look like he was asleep. His breathing wasn't even enough and he was fidgeting too much for it to be convincing. The silver-haired man walked up to the blonde boy and nudged him with his foot. Can't sleep. Naruto flinched, but kept on with his charade. I know you're not asleep, Kakashi sighed quietly. Let's go talk in the kitchen. It wasn't a suggestion, it was an order, and Naruto picked up on it quick. He crawled out of his bed, tucked his jacket under his arm, and followed Kakashi into the kitchen so that their conversation wouldn't disturb Sakura and Sasuke's sleep. The boy kept his gaze glued to the floorboards, and when he sat down at the kitchen table he transferred his gaze to the tabletop. He sat across from Naruto and took a few minutes to study the boy while he fidgeted. Kakashi hadn't paid much attention to Naruto at first, everything about the boy reminded him of something or someone he'd rather not remember. The kid was a mysterious contradiction, though, and quite against his will the Jonin found himself sucked in by this enigma. Naruto appeared to be a total clown, always loud and silly and clumsy. And yet he was a hard worker, a driven kid who had managed to master the Kagebunshin technique, something normally restricted to advanced Chunin and Jonin. A dedicated goof-off wouldn't work half as hard as Naruto did. The boy's lack of clear skill made him look weak, but he had power. The fact that he could use the Kagebunshin, even in a limited capacity, was proof of his raw chakra potential. And his ability to best Mizuki, who had been older and more experienced, and Haku who had been extremely talented and gifted with a dangerous Kekai Genkai, only reinforced his strength. Where does this strength come from? Kakashi wondered as he slouched in his chair while Naruto continually fidgeted. Is it a natural or unnatural consequence of his lineage? Kakashi's dark eye landed on Naruto's jacket, which was hanging off the wooden chair arm. Its bright colors overwhelmed its details, but the Jonin still noticed the white spiral patch on the shoulder. He remembered the same symbol attached to everything that woman had worn. So, you don't remember your original family name? The Jonin asked. The boy's tapping fingers stilled briefly. He clearly hadn't expected this question. But then his fingers went back to tapping on the tabletop and his legs swung underneath the table. It was like he was physically incapable of sitting still. Nope, he shrugged, still staring downwards. I don't remember it. The name Uzumaki means nothing to you. Naruto visibly flinched and it looked like he stopped breathing for a minute, but then he shrugged it off. No, why would it? Kakashi's eyebrow went up. So, you were disowned, then? His student jumped again, and even briefly looked up from the table before immediately dropping his eyes again. Maybe. So it was your mother who put you in the foster system? The Jonin inquired. No, the boy hissed and glared up at his teacher, with vertically slitted pupils. My mom loved me. It was everyone else who wanted me gone. Kakashi kept his posture relaxed, but he was anything but. Werewolves didn't have eyes like that. Was he completely wrong about this boy's bloodline? And they wanted you gone because. Because. Naruto abruptly cut himself off. He sat in his chair, panting and revealing that his teeth had elongated. The fury in him shifted to fear. I can't say, he whispered. I can't talk about any of it. It's not safe. They'll find out that I told, and they'll hurt anyone they have to so they can kill me. The Hatake line produced many fine hunters with noses that rivaled the Uchiha Clan, which lead to the occasional marriage every generation or so, and Kakashi had no trouble smelling the stench of fear that rolled off his student in waves. An ordinary person could have probably smelled it. I don't want anybody to get hurt because of me. Naruto sniffled and ducked his head to hide the watering of his eyes. Mom got hurt enough trying to keep me safe. Kakashi frowned deeply behind his mask. Talking with Naruto had only multiplied his questions exponentially, and he didn't dare press the boy any further tonight. If the boy snapped or panicked and lashed out, he could be very, very dangerous. Naruto, he said after giving the boy a few minutes to calm down. Why did you join Hokage-sama's forces as a demon hunter? Just because you were found to have great chakra potential didn't mean that you had to enroll in the academy. I want to be stronger, the boy answered, and when he looked up his eyes looked perfectly human. Mom wanted me to get strong enough to survive. I want to be stronger than that. I want to be able to protect her, and anybody else I like. The Jonin carefully weighed this answer before crinkling his visible eye into a smile for his student. An ambitious goal, the silver-haired man said. I hope I am one of those people that you like. I suppose, Naruto shrugged. I wish you weren't always so late. The blonde boy fell silent as a silver rectangle of moonlight appeared on the tabletop. Kakashi turned to the kitchen window to see that the clouds had parted, allowing the full moon to appear and shine brightly. When he looked back at Naruto, the boy had his head twisted away from the window and looked to be well on his way to hyperventilation. I'll go close all the drapes, Kakashi said and gripped the boy's shoulder in a brief comforting gesture before walking away to block off all the windows. Go get some sleep. Naruto scampered out of the kitchen without a word. As Kakashi went about sealing away all the moonlight on the ground floor, he wondered if he was making the same mistake that Jiraiya-sama had. When we return to Konoha, I need to have a long talk with Hokage-sama. Naruto quivered under the sheets of his futon. The moon jitters were forgotten and consumed by fear and confusion. It seemed like the crazy luck that had kept him from getting found out in Konoha was finally starting to run dry. Kakashi-sensei was suspicious of him. His Jounin-sensei might have even seen something when he'd gotten angry over the insult against his mother. With the full moon looming, it was near impossible to not change a little bit when he got upset. The masked man even seemed to know some things already. How did he know that name? Why would he offer to close all the drapes for me? If he knows, why didn't he kill me? He wanted to get up and ask Kakashi-sensei, but he was deathly afraid. If you let anyone see what you are, they will kill you. Naruto sniffled into his pillow, trying not to cry because he was 12 and way too old to be crying like a baby, but he was terrified. Mommy, what do I do? Chapter 3, Hidden in the Leaves. Hidden in the leaves. If they weren't so close to returning to the village, Sakura would have been tempted to complain about how her legs felt like jelly. Just because she had excellent chakra control didn't mean she could keep up with boys who had much bigger reserves when they traveled by tree branch. But they were close enough to get out of the trees and walk along the dirt road that led to the massive village gates, and she could last long enough to get to the tower, get paid, and go home. Almost home, she chanted to herself. Almost home, almost home, almost home. Her parents would be so proud of her. And glad that she'd come back in one piece. Hopefully they wouldn't get too mad when they heard about her upgraded C rank. Or, Maybe she'd leave out a few things. A dip in the road made her stumble, but she managed not to fall. Glancing around in embarrassment, she found Kakashi-sensei in the lead with his nose predictably buried in his book. Sasuke-kun was right behind him, and Naruto was trailing behind her. When the blonde boy failed to chat her up or even ask if she was alright, she frowned. Ever since the final fight on the bridge, Naruto had been weird, well, weirder. He'd been unusually quiet, distracted, and subdued. When he did act cheerful and gregarious, it was just that, an act. His stupid grins were strained and his laughs held a false edge to them. And whenever he hung around Kakashi-sensei he seemed tense like a hunted rabbit. At first she thought it was because of that boy, Haku. Apparently Naruto had encountered the Kiri boy in between their clashes with Zabuza and he'd had a few conversations with the rogue's apprentice. But that didn't explain why her teammate was so nervous when their laid-back sensei was nearby. What's wrong with him? As annoying and irritating as Naruto was, he was still a part of their team. Sakura hated to admit it, but he was useful even though he was as dense as a brick. He was strong, a good physical backup for Sasuke. If he was only halfway serious about his boasts of becoming the strongest hunter in the village, he had the potential to be a real asset to their team, or any future team he became a part of. So she worried about him. A little bit. Sakura almost turned back to her trailing teammate to ask him what was wrong. Here we are. At Kakashi-sensei's words, she focused her attention forward and saw the village gates coming into view through the dense trees. The towering double doors were decorated with the white swirled leaf, the symbol of Konoha Gakuer no Sato that they wore on their hitai. They were set into a massive wall that surrounded all but the training fields of Konoha and contained seal wards that kept the vast majority of demons out. Next to the capital of Fire Country and the Fire Temple, it was the safest and most demon-proof place in the whole land. The pink-haired girl smiled and mustered her strength to pick up the pace. Home was within sight and within reach. And when she got there, Ino Pig would be so jealous. Sasuke-kun was so brave and amazing. The Harano girl sighed dreamily as she recalled how he'd kept his cool when he'd tangled with the Mercenario and I brothers and how he'd somehow overcome Zabuza's dense mist and Haku's deadly ice mirrors to come out alive. Ino Pig will be so pissed that she missed it. Naruto's odd behavior was completely forgotten. Sasuke hit his nerves by burying his fists into his pockets as he entered the Uchiha district. As he walked under the arch bearing the red and white Uchiha fan and through the walls that sealed his clan's territory off from the rest of the village, he felt the invisible weight on his shoulders increase. Distant relations of his waved and greeted his return, but he barely noticed them. He was both dreading and anticipating what would happen when he reached his house. His mother would probably be there. But would his father be home? Or his brother? And how would his family take his report of his first mission outside the village walls? The fact that he had awakened his Sharingan counted in his favor. And the unexpected upgrade of his mission from C rank to A rank would also help. But the fact that he had almost died and needed saving, that counted against him. The Uchiha were the elite of the village. The only help they should ever need was from another Uchiha. To be saved by the village idiot was inexcusable. Naruto. Sasuke grimaced. How did he beat Haku? How did he do it? He had no idea. He'd been unconscious and locked into a state of false death when it had happened. Their sensei hadn't seen it as he was locked into his own battle with Zabuza. And Sakura hadn't seen anything due to the dense mist and the dome formed by Haku's ice mirrors. When Sasuke had asked Naruto directly about what had happened, the blonde had given him a vague answer that had involved Kagebun's hints. Sasuke strongly suspected that that was a lie. Naruto couldn't make many of those at a time and the chakra constructs were fragile and would be easily and swiftly destroyed by the Kiri boy's needles. So the question remained, how had Naruto defeated Haku? Sasuke, you're home. He looked up and found that he was on his own front doorstep and his mother, Uchiha Mikoto, was coming out the door to embrace him. Tadema, Sasuke sighed as his mother went about her motherly duties of embarrassing him. You were gone so long I was started to worry. She fussed and checked him over. She frowned slightly at the numerous tiny tears she noticed in his clothing. What happened? The client lied about his situation, he replied. Oh dear, his mother murmured in concern. Come inside, she said, taking his backpack from him, and tell us all about it. In the kitchen he found his father and older brother sipping at cups of tea. They must have just finished a training session as he could see hints of perspiration on their skin. Sasuke felt himself start to sweat for a different reason as his mother poured him his own cup of tea and his father gestured for him to speak. Sasuke faithfully told them all about his mission, just as his team had reported it to the Hokage barely a half an hour earlier. He told them about Tajuna's lie, the Oni brothers' attack, Zabuza's first strike, tree climbing training, and then the battle on the bridge. His narrative was only interrupted once when he reached the part where he had awakened the power of his eyes, and his mother gushed over them when he showed his new Sharingan off. Throughout his report, his father's face was completely impassive, giving no clue to what he thought. When Sasuke finished, he sat back in his chair and waited for his father's judgment. "Thank goodness everything turned out all right," his mother said, wringing her hands a bit. She was probably still upset over the knowledge that her baby had been turned into a pincushion. "Your sensei really should have aborted this mission. You tell him I said that," she added sternly. "I will," Sasuke promised, distracted by his father's continuing silence. His father, Uchiha Fugaku, stayed quiet for another few minutes, which felt like hours to Sasuke, before finally speaking. "So, you required a teammate to defend you. If he hadn't interfered I believe I would have been able to defeat the Kirinin," Sasuke answered. "My teammate's presence divided my attention, and his lack of skill and unpredictable behavior greatly reduced my effectiveness. It would have worked out so much better if Naruto had just stayed in Tajuna's house after sleeping in that morning. Or if he'd just stayed with Sakura to defend Tajuna, things would have gone better. But no, the idiot just had to throw himself through the last crack in Haku's mirror dome and constantly get himself in the way. And your teammate claims that he used the Kagebunshin no Jutsu to defeat the Kirinin." "That is what he claimed," Sasuke nodded. "You don't believe that?" "It seems unlikely to me that he used that technique as he claimed," Sasuke explained. He could not describe the strategy he used against the Kirinin with any detail to anyone, not even the Hokage, and he could not demonstrate what he did either. "Being unconscious at the time I can't say what he did or did not do. Due to the mist technique and the ice mirror, no one else could see what he did either." His father thought this over for a minute and then turned to Itachi. "Research this boy. I want a full background check done on him and his lineage through his great-grandparents." "Yes, father," Itachi nodded. And then his father finished his tea and got up from the table. "I'm going back to the office," he announced and left the kitchen. "I may be late for dinner." The office was the headquarters of the military police, a security force led by and mainly comprised of Uchiha Clan members. They looked into whatever crime happened in the village, from petty crimes like shoplifting and vandalism to the rarer more serious crimes like murder. The military police was an important organization, and one that had been around since shortly after the formation of Konoha Gakure no Sato. Sasuke's father was the chief of the military police as well as the head of the whole Uchiha clan. "You did a good job, Sasuke," his older brother said as he finished off his hot drink and left to work on his new little assignment. "Keep working at it. I still think your sensei should have aborted the mission," his mother said. "But you did very well, especially against such dangerous foes. I was a Chunin before I faced down my first rogue demon hunter." "I'm going to go take a shower," Sasuke said and abandoned his unfinished tea. "Okay, dinner will be in a few hours," his mother called after him. He barely heard her as he climbed the stairs to the second floor. His brother had praised him. His mother had praised him. But his father hadn't. That spoke volumes. "I need to train twice as hard," he thought as he prepared for his shower. "I can never be rescued like that again." Naruto felt like he was going to puke. He'd made it out of the land of waves without any other freaky conversations with Kakashi-sensei. He'd managed to lie to the Hokage about the way he'd won a fight for the second time. He'd made it out of the Hokage's office and back to Iruka's apartment. And he'd started to think that his luck had held, that Kakashi-sensei had forgotten about the full moon chat, or that it hadn't even happened at all and he'd just hallucinated the whole thing. But then, just after Iruka had brought him back from Ichiraku's and their celebratory dinner that commemorated his first successful real mission, D-ranks didn't count, Kakashi-sensei had showed up. His silver-haired teacher had been cheerful and casual like he usually was and told them that the Hokage wished to speak with Naruto. And so here they were, Kakashi-sensei leading Iruka and himself towards the Hokage Tower complex, and Naruto was going to puke up all the wondrous Ichiraku noodles that he'd consumed. "Are you sure you can't tell us what this is about?" Iruka asked for the 5th time. "You'll see when we get there," Kakashi-sensei said casually, his nose planted in his little orange book. Naruto didn't want to see when he got there. He wanted to flee, because he knew it would be bad. But where could he flee to? Should he run to Okamijiji, or turn on him in the hopes that it would save his skin? How could he flee with Iruka, a Chunin, and Kakashi-sensei, a Jonin, nearby? What could he do? He didn't cause any trouble while he was out of the village, did he? Iruka asked worriedly. No, the Jonin chuckled. He did well, all things considered. Fear made Naruto's hands slimy and his limbs twitchy. Ever since he'd earned his Hitaiate from Iruka, it had become harder and harder to hide his wretched secret. It wore on his nerves and made it so much harder for him to act normally. It felt like a string of silver-edged kunai were dangling over his head now, ready to fall on him at any second. If he didn't cause any trouble, why is he being called back so soon after returning from a mission? "You'll see when we get there," Kakashi-sensei repeated patiently. Even though his Jonin mentor was acting like this was no big deal, Naruto knew that it was. He could feel it crawling under his skin and worming into his bones. He was in trouble one way or the other, and Kakashi-sensei was just being all normal to try and keep him calm, which only made it worse. "Relax, Naruto," Kakashi-sensei advised as they entered the tower and started up the stairs to the Hokage's office. "Nothing bad is going to happen." "Liar." Naruto wanted to yell, just like all the times he and Sakura-chan would yell it whenever he gave his ridiculous excuses for being late. "Liar, liar, liar." And then there were in the Hokage's office. It was a fairly large room with a half-circle of windows arrayed behind a massive wooden desk. The desk was cluttered with stacks of paperwork and a few odd scrolls here and there. And behind the desk sat Sarutobi Hiruzen, the Hokage of Konoha Gakure no Sato. When Naruto had first met him after he'd been tested for chakra potential, he hadn't recognized him as someone who was important. He was a kind, smiling old man who was friendly, like a grandfather. All the other adults he'd met that were in positions of authorities were mean, sour-faced, unpleasant people like social workers, teachers, principals, and so on. And since he hadn't imagined the nice old man was anyone important like this Hokage guy was supposed to be, that first day he'd asked him when the Hokage was going to show up. Hokage-sama had been amused, and then insulted when Naruto had refused to believe him that he was the Hokage. "Good evening, Naruto," the old man greeted with a friendly twinkle in his eye. "And welcome, Iruka." He took his pipe from his mouth and gestured towards some chairs placed in front of his desk. "Please, sit down and relax. What is this all about, if you don't mind my asking?" Iruka politely inquired as he took one of the chairs. Naruto slunk into the chair next to Iruka and stared at his clasped hands, too freaked out to look anywhere else, and Kakashi-sensei took the final chair on the other side on him. "I just have a few questions to ask Naruto," the Hokage answered and shuffled through a few things on his desk. "It should all be quite painless. Now, Naruto, do you recognize this person?" The old man pulled a photograph out of a file and turned it so he could see. It was all Naruto could do to not leap out of his chair and snatch the picture from the Hokage's fingers. Being barely 5 when he'd been cast out, Naruto's memory of his mother's face was starting to fade. To see a picture of her again smiling a flashing a peace sign. He wanted it. Badly. No, he lied and tore his stare away from the image with great effort. "She's pretty though." "Who is she?" The Hokage looked at him with disappointed eyes, as if he knew that Naruto was lying, and maybe he did. "This is Uzumaki Kushina, she is a demon hunter of Uzugakure no Sato, a small hunter village on the shores of Uzu no Kuni, the land of whirlpools. She lived among us for several years as a liaison, a ninja on loan almost, and a sign of the alliance between our two villages. When she finally elected to return home, a little over 12 years ago, she was pregnant." "Why are you asking him about this woman?" Iruka wondered. "Do you think she's his mother? He really doesn't look anything like her." "We are certain," the old man said, making Naruto flinch and sweat harder. That white swirl symbol Naruto has on his jacket closely resembles her clan symbol. The Hokage pulled out a different picture from the file, an image of a white spiral on a field of black as proof of it. And while he has little resemblance to Uzumaki Kushina, he bears an uncanny resemblance to her boyfriend. The photograph that the old man showed him was of a man that Naruto had truly never seen before. He was handsome and friendly looking with sparkling blue eyes and dandelion yellow hair. Perhaps when Naruto grew up he'd look sort of like this. This was his mother's boyfriend. This was the root of all of his suffering. This was his father. A lump of ice formed in the pit of his stomach and he wanted to set the photograph on fire. That's... Iruka paused and Naruto watched as he squinted at the picture. Isn't that? And then shocked horror danced over the Chunin's scarred face. Isn't he the werewolf? Naruto was startled that Iruka knew that. But when he peeked at the picture again he spied the Hittite the man was wearing and realized that he had been a demon hunter ninja of Konoha. When he became a werewolf, everybody would have heard about it. And if it got out that this was his father, then everyone would know. He paled and felt lightheaded, sick. Looking back at Iruka, he saw worry, suspicion. Dread pressed down on him as panic tried to force him up out of his chair. What sort of evil bad luck had landed him in this place? This place where both of his parents were known, where he could never keep his secret forever. Why couldn't he have ended up in some other demon hunting village, like Kumo? Kumo was nice, wasn't it? Any other village wouldn't have known either of them, wouldn't have cared. A heavy hand grasped Naruto's shoulder and he spun wildly to see Kakashi-sensei's masked face gazing down at him, unreadable. Naruto. Relax. If I thought you were a danger, or if Hokage-sama thought you were a danger, you would have been taken care of already. As scary as that statement was, it also said that they were giving him a chance. Really? He squeaked. Yes, really, the Hokage confirmed, and Naruto slumped bonelessly back into his seat. Nothing we have seen since you have lived here, and nothing in the records that we have on you, says that you are dangerous. I see great potential in you and it would be terrible to throw it away. And I admit there is a chance to learn from you, there is very little information on children of werewolves. The old man took a long draw on his pipe. Although, in order to make this work you will need to be open and honest with us about any problems you may have, like silver allergies and the full moon. Naruto felt drained. It was exhausting to be so scared. All he wanted to do was crawl into bed and sleep for a week. Do we have to talk about all of that now? He whined. No, we don't, the Hokage chuckled. But it must be addressed soon, you understand. Okay, Naruto muttered sullenly. He eyed the two photographs on the Hokage's desk. Can I have that picture? Of course, the old man said kindly. And offered him the wrong picture. Not that one, Naruto growled, recoiling from the photo of the man in disgust. The other one. I want my mom's picture. All right. The old man handed him the right picture, but didn't put the wrong one down. Are you sure you don't want this one, too? Why would I want that? Naruto asked, genuinely baffled. It made no sense to him. He'd never meet the man, he'd turned into a wolf monster and was off howling at the moon and killing things, if he was even still alive. The guy couldn't have been all that great because he'd gotten chewed up by a werewolf. A real demon hunter would never have fallen prey to something chaotic and stupid like a werewolf. His mom had probably gotten involved with him because he was good-looking and amusing to her, somehow. If you're sure. I'm sure, Naruto told him. Can I go now? I'm tired. There was some sadness in the old man's eyes, but he nodded and dismissed him with a wave of his smoking pipe. Naruto hopped off his chair and scampered out of the office before the adults could think of anything to talk about that would delay his escape. He didn't care if he was being followed or if he was walking alone. He just focused on the picture of his mother. When he'd been cast out, he hadn't been permitted to take anything with him that would tie him to his ex-family, and that included pictures of his mother. It was awesome beyond words to have a picture of her again, so that he would never have to fear forgetting her face again. Tomorrow he'd look into buying a picture frame for it. Are you sure you don't want your father's picture? The boy flinched and glanced over his shoulder to find both Kakashi-sensei and Iruka following him. I'm sure, Naruto repeated in annoyance. You're not going to ask me that too, are you, Iruka? No, the Chunin replied quietly. Good, Naruto huffed. I sense some resentment here, Kakashi-sensei commented mildly. He's the reason I got disowned, Naruto snapped bitterly as his fingertips lightly traced his mother's long red hair. Why shouldn't I resent him? Sarutobi Hiruzen was an old man, and he felt every one of his many years and then some. To manage and control the sprawling and varied forces of his village was exhausting and consuming. There was a lot to do and never enough time to do it. With so many things going at once, he had to delegate many tasks that he'd much rather take care of personally. And this situation with Naruto was regrettably one of these tasks. But at least he had a trustworthy and experienced individual he could put in charge of it. At a quiet signal, one of his Umbu appeared in his office and prepared to receive his orders. Spread the word through Umbu that all agents should be on the lookout for Jiraiya. Regardless of what he is doing, he is to report back to me for a special assignment. The masked hunter bowed and with a quiet, "Hi, Hokage-sama," vanished again. The Hokage sighed and puffed on his pipe, thought about all the civilians under his protection, and hoped that his faith in Naruto was not misplaced. That's it for part 1. Thank you for watching and see you on the next video.